Hello and welcome back to F1 Isn't Real. I am your host, relieved Ferrari enthusiast Ben Wevel, and today Amesh and I will once again break down this weekend's Australian Grand Prix, which for about 10 minutes had me literally praying to the F1 gods in thanks. Amesh, it's been a couple of early mornings for us F1 fans, but I think it's paid off, right?
Yeah, it definitely has, Ben. Thank you for having me again. I think this weekend was very eventful and a relief for many F1 fans out there.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I mean, the main storyline here, the main headline, of course, is Carlos Sainz's astounding, well, not astounding, but I think in terms of this Max Verstappen-centric sport in which we live, I think quite phenomenal victory. And that's also especially considering his comeback after that appendix surgery, but 2 weeks ago. What a savior. Even Martin Brundle admitted during the race that the sport needed a shot in the arm, such as Carlos Sainz has provided for us. How important is it, do you think, that Max didn't win the Australian Grand Prix purely in terms of the health of the sport?
Oh, I think it's a pretty significant event that's happened. I did say in the past, in a few episodes ago, that there's still a lot to this season to come. I think after Bahrain, probably that I said that Max Verstappen might not win every race this season, even though it really felt like it was going to be the case. I'm really happy that we have a new winner this season and this early on in the season because it definitely gives all the current F1 fans a lot more hope for the rest of the races.
But not only does it give, F1 fans a real, I think this is, a lifeline for us. We may have seen, I mean, I know Max Verstappen obviously is going to make his mistakes down the line, but I think we needed this to remind us that F1 can be a sport of competition. I think just in the past, few years, we've seen Max Verstappen really take control of every aspect of victory in the sport. And I think just the fact that the Red Bull package failed on Sunday is sort of a testament to the fact that you could have the best car in the world and the most dominant car in the world, but the reality of F1 is that you never quite know what's going to happen come racing, come lights out. And I think it's an important reminder for people like us that we shouldn't take these wins for granted, and that for somebody like, Carlos Sainz, who's only taking up, I believe, I think this is his, yeah, only his second Formula One victory. This is something that is integral to the life of the Formula One driver. They don't want to come second, they want to win. And Carlos Sainz won today. And not only did he win, but he won with an appendix removed, as I already said. How impressed are you by his recovery, by his race, and by his mental fortitude going through, presumably what would have been quite a few aches and pains to secure a phenomenal race victory?
Yeah, I'm really impressed with Carlos Sainz actually. Coming straight from an appendix surgery and having losing his seat for next year. I think there's definitely been a lot of pressure on the driver, and I think diamonds are made under pressure, and it's definitely shown with Carlos Sainz's drive yesterday. I think he definitely performed to the best of his ability, especially given his medical conditions. I think what was it after the race? There was a post on Instagram about with him and Lando Norris after the podium, and he still had a patch on his stomach covering up the scar, which just shows how soon after he was back in the car after his surgery, which is nothing but impressive. And it's astonishing how he's managed to win a race in this condition.
Do you think Carlos Sainz will not only take solace in this race victory in the fact that he recovered so quickly, but also that I think, as a point that Lawrence Barretto made after the Grand Prix to Carlos Sainz himself, this now puts him at the forefront of the market in Formula One. So not only did he obviously secure that podium in the first race, but now he secures a race victory in a season that seemed as if it was going to be dominated by one driver, obviously for reasons which were out of that one driver's control. Um, but in contrast to Carlos Sainz's, mature and controlled performance, we saw Checo Perez, Max Verstappen's teammate, who was seemingly destined for a podium in that Red Bull package, which George Russell described as a rocket ship halfway through the race. Um, we saw him ending up in a mere fifth place in what, frankly, is, I would say, from the Red Bull perspective, an unacceptable position for the second driver. I think, an interesting point made on the day was that Max Verstappen is there to win and Checo Perez is there to pick up the scraps when things go wrong. And yet it was two Ferraris and two McLarens that bested him. How do you think a win like this for Carlos is going to influence his ability to vie for a top drive such as that at Red Bull next season, especially when compared to some of the shortcomings that Perez certainly put on display this weekend?
I definitely think this win has made an impact on Carlos Sainz's prospects for next year. Um, I don't think he's underrated. I think all the teams definitely know of his talents. In a post-race interview, I heard this from Lando Norris that every constructor has their eyes on Carlos Sainz. He didn't say that. He was saying that he's not overrated, underrated. Sorry, and I agree with that, and I think that many teams will be looking out for Carlos Sainz for next year if they have a seat open. As in terms for Checo Perez, I think it's been a difficult last season and a half for him. He's picked up a couple of wins, but at the same time, his consistency just hasn't been there. And I think that's quite important, especially for a Red Bull and especially for a team that should be winning championships and taking victory race in, race out. So I think there's been a lot more pressure recently on Sergio Perez, and I think Carlos Sainz has done nothing but prove himself just once again to every other team.
Do you think it's partially sort of, we saw Red Bull struggle on Sunday, obviously Max Verstappen with his brake issue. Do you think the only explanation for Perez's placement, obviously there's a pressure element of it, but we've seen the pace of the Red Bull in the hands of Max Verstappen and it is blistering. And even on a bad day, I think that that Red Bull should be able to best most of the field. Um, do you think that obviously there's an element of pressure in it, but do you think that just the Red Bull package was not, or the Red Bull team in general was just not prepared for Melbourne as they usually as they usually were, as they usually will be?
I think the team itself was ready for this weekend. I think they've shown they've been ready for every weekend for the last 2 years, and I think in terms of Checo Perez, I think his performance is definitely reflected on the idea that this Red Bull car is built around Max Verstappen and it's not built around him as much. And I think that idea is the reason for his performance. I think I said this before that Alex Albon was doing a podcast talking about what it's like to be Max Verstappen's teammate, and he said that the car is definitely built around him, and there's a lot of pressure being his teammate, especially because of the car. And I think if Carlos Sainz was to join Red Bull, there would definitely be that same pressure and that was on Sergio Perez. I think that would be on Carlos Sainz if he ever joins Red Bull. But I think what's different between the two drivers is that Carlos Sainz has that natural ability to adapt, just like Kimi Raikkonen did back in the day.
Mm.
So I definitely think there is that hope. But I think in terms of the team itself, I think it's everyone makes mistakes, and I think it's time that Red Bull did as well in this weekend.
Do you have any sort of sense of a kind of waning commitment maybe to Red Bull in general? Because I think this is sort of something that we saw with, someone like Valtteri Bottas as his Mercedes career was coming to an end. He was sort of, it felt as if he wasn't particularly willing to give as much up to Mercedes. And we've seen Perez, notably in Spain in 2022, then obviously in Brazil. We've seen Perez sort of come under some, come under some conditions from Red Bull that, in the terms of sort of good sportsmanship, would probably not be considered as very morally justifiable. Do you think that Sergio Perez is becoming frustrated by this Red Bull team? And even when he's given this opportunity to make a name for himself within the Red Bull team, when Max isn't there, he's just less driven to take it because he knows that at the end of the day, he's still going to be a number two driver.
Um, I think that Sergio Perez isn't in the position to be frustrated. I can see as a driver in a team where you're being commanded to move out the way for the first driver, that can be quite frustrating. But at the same time, when moments like these aren't happening, there's still a lack of performance. Like you said today, um, this weekend, Max Verstappen was out, and it was all down to Sergio Perez. There were no team orders because Max was out, yet he still failed to perform to the highest position that Red Bull expect of him. So I think if he were to be performing, placing P2 in and out every weekend behind Max Verstappen, then it's more plausible for Perez to be not complaining, but have that viewpoint. I think right now his priority is making sure he's doing the best he can instead of focusing on what the team should be telling him to do or what he wants the team to tell him to do.
Is it beyond Red Bull to give up on Checo before the end of the year?
That's a difficult question. I think I like to say every driver needs time, but at the same moment, Perez has had this opportunity for a while. Joined the team in 2021. His first season was pretty good. He definitely helped Max win the championship. But from there on out, it sort of went downhill. And I think that's just him as a driver aging. I think it definitely has a toll on you when you get past a certain age. I think with every athlete in general, you move past a certain point and it just makes it more difficult for them to perform. And I
Mm.
think I wouldn't be completely surprised if Red Bull decide to drop Sergio Perez. We've seen them be extremely harsh in the past, and I think I'll be honest, I think they're being quite generous keeping Perez this year because if you look at the likes of Daniel Kvyat, Daniel Ricciardo, no, not Daniel Ricciardo, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, they've been a lot harsher on those drivers compared to Sergio Perez.
Who do you think they would, if there was one driver that you think would be a good short-term replacement for Checo, who do you think that would be? Because, Carlos Sainz is not gonna, you know, I don't think that he's gonna be able to walk out of his contract with Ferrari before the end of the season. So if there was a short-term option, where do you think they would go?
It's hard to say because I don't really think there is um, a justifiable or reasonable short-term option for Red Bull here because all of the options that they could be taking seem like long-term commitments because, like you said, Carlos Sainz, he'd be in it for the long run.
Mm.
Same with Lando Norris. There were talks about him and Max Verstappen being teammates, and if those driver moves were to happen, there would be a long-term, definitely multi-year contracts. But in terms of if there had to be a short-term possibility, I hypothetically would go with Fernando Alonso
Mm.
because um, I think Fernando Alonso, he is coming to an end of his career. He's what, 40 something now. And I think he's still got that in him, outperforming in the Aston Martin, definitely leading the team. And I think Red Bull can definitely see that. And I think if he were to go to Red Bull for a year or so, he would definitely be able to lift the spirits up on from the second driver position and just help the team out a bit more.
Mm. On the subject of Fernando Alonso, one of the more, I mean, there were many points of contention this weekend, but one of the more controversial moments of the weekend was the final lap of the Grand Prix. You had George Russell chasing down Fernando Alonso for a sixth place finish. And it's been alleged, it seems from onboards